Our first event in celebration of the NEA B Grade Award that Eastern has received for third consecutive year. The NEA B Grade is an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest that broadens our understanding of our world, our neighbors, and ourselves through power of a shared reading. This year, we are excited to read Charles Yu's book, Interior Chinatown. Today, we are honored to launch what will be a six-month-long program of book readings, talks, and exhibitions hosted by Eastern and by our collaborators that include Willimantic Public Library, Asian American Writers Workshop in New York, and the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles, among others. Our invitation to President Chen to launch the B Grade Award was prompted by the fact that as an Asian American writer himself, he is uniquely suited as our close colleague to provide insights into their shared background. Together with Professor of Graphic Design Laura Lee, the director of this award, we are looking forward to hearing President Cheng's about his book, Deep into the Mountain, An Encounter with Qizhan. The program for this morning is as follows. Dr. Elsa Nunes will share her welcoming note, followed by Dr. Cheng's presentation, discussion moderated by Ben Polly, English Department Chair, question and answers, and will continue by a reception and book signing at the gallery. Thank you.
We do owe Yulia and the faculty members and staff members who worked with her on writing the proposal a very, very big note of gratitude, because it isn't easy to accomplish what they do as a team, which is this is the third consecutive year they've won the grant for the Big Read. Thank you. And congratulations. Yulia, thank you for your leadership. President Cheng began his job as the head of our state college and university system last year. It has been a pleasure personally for me to get to know him and to work closely with him on a range of issues facing our colleges and universities, in particular right now, the budget issues that we're all facing. His personal and professional experience align well with the needs of our campuses and in particular with the needs of our students. He's focused on making it all work for our students. Before he came to this position, he was the executive director of the Connecticut campus in Stamford for 5 years. He's also no stranger to the classroom, having served as a member of the English department at Stanford campus as a professor of English. Our students will appreciate President Cheng's scholarship. He was a James Michener Fellow during his graduate studies at the University of Miami in Florida. President Cheng also received a literature fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2005. He is the author of 2 superb novels, Sons of Heavens, published in 2002, Deep in the Mountains, published in 2007, as well as many short stories and essays. In both novels, what makes the novels special and unique is that he, as a Chinese man, surrounds the underpinnings of a culture in the context of his work. As the book he will discuss today, culture is at the heart of Charles Yu's writing, as is its cultural core. We are so honored that he is here today as a man representing a culture that has a deep, deep tradition in literature. He has a big job ahead of him, we know, as he leads the 12 community colleges, 4 state universities, and Charter Oak State College, which serves more than 7,200 students. But I think you will agree with me this morning that he is well positioned to lead us because he has a particular cultural lens. He understands the needs of our students. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you the president of our system, President Terrence Cheng.
Is my mic okay? I'm not going to stand here. I'm going to walk around a little bit. I get to be a professor for a half a day, and this is thrilling to me because usually Dr. Nunez and I are dealing with things with spreadsheets and numbers, and it's not nearly as much fun, to be quite honest with you, as to be able to talk about the things that we all got into higher education for, which is to work with people. Right, to work with people, and I'm going to say students, but it's not just about the students, it's about the people. So before I kind of go into my fake TED Talk, because I'll never be invited to give a real TED Talk, so this is like one of my only shots, right? I have to thank President Nunez. She's amazing, okay? She's amazing. She works tirelessly. It's a 24/7 job to be a university president. She's done it for 17 years. And she has led this institution fearlessly through very difficult times, through challenges that, frankly, none of us could have imagined. Things like COVID, things like, budget reductions from the state, all the things that, frankly, so many of us don't see. The president and her team do that every single day. And so I want to thank her for her indefatigable leadership and the hard work that you put in every day also. Thank you so much. Can we give her a round of applause, please? And the same goes for the administrators, but it also goes for the faculty. I remember when I first got my faculty position, I came from private sector, and then I went into, I almost tripped, that would have been bad. See, this is why I don't get invited to TED Talks, because I'm going to fall off the stage. My dad said, wait, you're leaving your full-time job where you make good money and you have good health benefits and you're going to become a professor and a writer? And I said, yeah. And he goes, so you're going to read books and talk about books for a living? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, that's not a real job, right? And I think people think that about faculty, right? They think like, well, you show up to the class and you talk about some stuff, or you do this in the classroom and blah, 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 and you're out of here. You're only here 2 days or 3 days a week. It's not a real job. Faculty work all the time. All the time. So whatever the perception is that they're not doing, more than 20 or 30 hours of work a week is ridiculous. Okay, so our faculty and the staff too, they are indefatigable. They're doing incredible work. And to be honest with you, without that work, Eastern wouldn't be one of the highest ranked universities in the Northeast. That's right? The Northeast was ranked in the North, not in the Northeast, the North, sorry. See, this is why she's the boss. So I want you guys to give the faculty and the staff and the administrators here a round of applause too, because they really bust their tails for you guys. So a little bit about myself. I'm an immigrant from Taiwan. I came here when I was about a year old. My parents, my family left Taiwan, and they had pretty good lives. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked at the university in the athletics department. They came to the United States. My mom spoke a little English. She waited tables, and my dad, who didn't speak any English, was pumping gas and stocking shelves at a supermarket, right? And, you rent an apartment, you do all these things. They do all that to give me a good life. I did what I was told. I did what I had to do, right, with my family. They gave me the tools that I needed. And I'll tell you that that's one of the reasons why I feel such kinship with this book, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. So I'll just tell you, I'm going to ramble a little bit. I'm going to ask you guys some questions, because my understanding is a variety of you have potentially read portions of the book to some degree at a given time, maybe. Is that fair? Okay, so we'll see who's actually read the book, and if you didn't, then you don't get any cake or coffee or whatever the hell comes after this. So I feel great kinship with this book. Okay, and I'll tell you a few things why. First, I think the form. How many of you are writers? Anyone? Anyone? Handful here. Creative writing majors? English majors? Okay. How many of you have read a short story that you like? Okay, all right, we'll start there. Okay, good. So the form of the book, I think, is really cool, to put it simply, right? It is written in the format of a movie script. The way it uses that form to blend fiction and reality, to use the fictional TV show that it's talking about as a metaphor, to use the show as a construct, to use the roles that Asians will play in that show as a kind of social caste system or hierarchy that applies not only in the American society, but in the Chinatown society of the characters itself. That's pretty remarkable, and it's done with such simplicity. Right? You just read it. This is a fast read. If you have it, I almost tripped on this damn thing again. We might have to take this up. It reads so fluidly. It reads so easily. And that's one of the things I find so remarkable about it. Right? I was just listening to an interview with the author, and he's talking about his process, and he's talking about how long it took, and he's talking about, the pain and the suffering that he's gone through. And I'm like, yes, it's hard. It's hard being an artist, right? It's hard being a writer. It's hard doing anything that, frankly, society and no one else in the world will ever ask you to do. No one's going to ask you to paint a painting. They're not going to put, the proverbial gun to your head and say, paint me a painting, write me a story, dance me a dance, write me a poem. Art comes from here. Art comes from here, and then it goes here. That's what makes it hard, right? So listening to him talk about how hard it is reminds me of my own journey, of course. I think it should remind all of us about the work that we put in, and then it's like a millisecond, right? I was here last time to watch a student performance. Lasted, a couple hours? But I know it took hundreds of hours to get there. It took hundreds of hours to create that moment for us, right? So the work that goes in, it's inspiring, but it's easy and it's fast when we experience it. And that's because so much work went in behind it. So the form itself, the second person point of view, right? Just to be like English nerd professor for a second, the use of the second person point of view that draws the reader in, you do this, you do that. We're talking about the I character, but the use of the second person draws you, the reader, in. And that, I think, again, it's really kind of fluid and it's so subtle, but it works so well. If you do it too much, it starts to feel contrived. But the way he does it, it's just beautiful. The themes really speak to me. So I'll tell you that I've lived the majority of my life as a model minority, right? You come here, your parents don't know what they don't know, right? They might be educated in their home country where they came from, but then they come to the United States, and you got to figure it out. Like, how many of you are immigrants? Big up for immigrants, yay, okay. So, I don't know what it was like for you. My parents didn't understand what it meant to have professional development. They didn't know in college I needed internships. They didn't know through high school and middle school and all my upbringing how important it was for me to be a part of certain social things in our neighborhood or in our community, because you don't know what you don't know. And you also don't have certain luxuries. Right, so some of the themes in this book, the life of the immigrant, the life of someone who's poor, right? The life of someone who's poor. If you've read the book, there's a part of the book that talks about something that happens to a child because there's flooding, and the flood water ends up affecting the child and hurting the child's health, right? To put it bluntly, that only happens to poor people. Okay? Because when you have resources and you have money, your pipes don't leak and you don't drink nasty water, right? So this is the kind of thing that comes out in the book that is actually so fluid, and only when you read it and then you think about it, it hits you like an hour later. You're like, oh my God, There's a part of the book that talks about how their SRO, the single resident occupancy, it's basically a super small apartment, and they're all packed together into like this kind of almost like a honeycomb of apartments. And how the space of their life is measured in cubes. It's not measured in square footage, right? How many of you have heard, like, either dealt with real estate or heard people talking about real estate or whatever it is, and they say, oh, the house, it's 1,500 square feet, it's 2,000 square feet, it's 3,000 square feet, right? We're talking about square footage. Poor people don't have square footage. You don't get 1,000 square feet when you're poor. You get 100. You get maybe 200. So your life is in cubes. You use every single piece of your space. You hang stuff, you put stuff on shelves, you're hanging stuff from the ceiling. So again, these details, they really struck out to me. I was never, in that situation, thank goodness. But it spoke to me because it reminded me of my own family's struggles, to be blunt, right? Not having resources, having to work all the time. One last element I remember, just because I think this is an important thing, because art is going to project us into life. And as Picasso said, art is the lie that reveals the truth, right? So we don't think about certain things, but art will make you think about certain things, right? And so the way it peels that back is really powerful. That's one of the themes. The themes about race, racism, again, I said before, as a model minority, as somebody who grew up a certain way, you're kind of taught to keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, do your work, fit in, right? We hear the word all the time, assimilate, 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 get along, fit in, don't make any trouble. I think all of that, to me, thankfully, has been blown up. The disruption of our sensibilities that certain things are normal and okay in our society, that has been massively disrupted. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly valuable, right? And so I think this is where talking about race, talking about the tensions of race, the problems of race, where folks will fit in is really important. Art can do that. Literature can do that. And I think this is one of the things that makes this program and all of you, theoretically, reading the book, that's important, right? To be able to engage with something that maybe you didn't engage with before, right? The way the book talks about the racial construct, the racial caste system or hierarchy, again, within the book itself, within the show, right? And where Asians fit in. The Asian American experience to me is one that I live every day and I'm still trying to figure out, right? And there's one of the predominant, prevailing themes of this book is, where do Asians fit, right? So I have 2 kids. They're biracial, but unfortunately, they have some of my looks. They have Asian features. And, they'll say, like, my older daughter's been asked, where are you from? She's like, I was born in Beth Israel in New York City. What are you talking about? I'm from New York, right? I'm from the United States. My younger daughter has gotten it too. Why is that? Why is that, right? The question is uncomfortable, and it should be uncomfortable. But the answer is easy. It's because of the eyes. It's because of the shape of the face. It's because of the tone of the skin, right? The question of Americanness and who is American and what qualifies as American is a really important question. It's an important question today. It's going to be an important question for generations. When I'm gone, we're still going to be fighting about this question. But the important thing is that we keep fighting the fight. We keep having that conversation, right? And I would say, especially for Asians and Asian Americans, Asians who have been targeted by federal law, by state law, quotas, who can own land, so on and so forth, right? Another thing that the book, Interior Chinatown, breaks down for you with just a few simple pages. You read some of these pages, you go, oh my God, I didn't know that. I didn't know about Japanese internment camps. I didn't know they rounded up over 100,000 Japanese people and put them in camps in the 20th century. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Chinese people were not allowed to come to the United States according to a federal law passed in the 1880s. I didn't know that. These are the things that we don't know because they're uncomfortable, because we don't want to talk about them. And society and the system, and I'm going to shut up in a second. I'm going to ask Dr. Pauly to come up here and we're going to have the real conversation. Society doesn't want us to talk about these things because they're uncomfortable. We're never going to get better and stronger if we're not uncomfortable. That's the only way you're going to do it. The body is an organism. The mind is part of that organism. It only gets stronger when it's stressed, when it's tested, when it's broken just a little bit, just enough, and then it has to heal and then get stronger. Okay? We have to constantly test ourselves. This book, to me, is not just a reflection and something that I have a kinship with, but it's also something that I feel, as a broad readership, can really test people. Makes us think about, well, where do Asians kind of fit in? Right? For those of you who have read some of the book, there's a show in the book called Black and White. But in the book, in the show, the Asians are only nameless characters. Generic Asian Man 1, generic Asian Man 2, sultry hostess, whatever the hell it is, they're nameless characters. They are bit players. The ideal is to become Kung Fu Man or Kung Fu Man or whatever it is. Right? But even that, the pay grade is below the white characters and the black characters. Right? So again, the symbolism, the metaphor in this book is very powerful. So, I'm going to shut up. Who has actually read the whole book? Well, not you guys. You're like the administrators and stuff. Students? Anyone? Part of the book? Part of the book. Okay. Part of the book. All right, I'll give you. So I'm going to pick on you now because you fell for my trap. So what stood out to you so far about the book? You can't repeat anything I just said, so go. And what's your name?
My name is Ian.
Ian? Okay, go ahead.
From what I remember, I don't think the main character had an actual name.
He does, but his roles are always, his name's Willis.
Okay. It was actually pretty interesting how his father, he was kind of following the footsteps of his father with acting, but it kind of took his father down a road which just ultimately was pretty dehumanizing because of those nameless character traits. And as he was getting older, he became generic, old Asian man and stuff like that. So it was pretty interesting to see how that also played with the in-book TV show, how the episodes progressed.
Yeah. So I don't know how many of you were able to hear that, but he's talking about the main character's father and how the main character's father is actually a kung fu master, and he becomes kung fu guy in the shows, and he kind of ascends through the hierarchy, right? He ascends to a certain point, but then as he gets older, he just fades, right? And not only does he fade in terms of the roles that he'll play, he fades in his life as well. His health starts to go down, his connection from his family goes down. So there's an arc, there's a journey there. It's pretty heartbreaking, right? I found it very moving, just thinking about that dynamic, especially between children and parents and what they're supposed to do. Somebody else here semi-read the book. I saw a hand or a flinch or a twitch. You want to tell us what was kind of sticking out to you? There's a metaphor, right, in terms of the characters are all actors and playing a role, but the metaphor applies also to the role of Asians or to the role of immigrants in society. What role does society want us to play? What role do they expect of us? Right? There's a part of the book, sorry to kind of blow this up a little bit if you haven't read it yet, but there's a part of the book where there are all these Asian students, and they're all like PhD candidates, right? And they all speak perfect English. And then they start to kind of, get into the world of acting, and they can't get, or no, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it's either applying for acting jobs or they're just applying for jobs. But they weren't getting jobs, even though they have perfectly good qualifications and experience. And someone says to them, well, it's your accent. And they said, well, I don't have an accent. And the guy's like, I know, it's weird. Right? What does that say about the expectations? It says something about this, people expect something. How many times have I heard, wow, you're a lot taller than I thought you would be. Right? You don't expect a 6'2", 250-pound Chinaman to come up on the stage, right, when you hear Terrence Cheng. You don't expect that, right? So I think this is about exploding people's perceptions. One more person, and I'm going to ask Dr. Pauly to come up and get me back on track here. Anyone else want to share some thoughts on the book? You read 5 pages, 25 pages, all 240 pages. I'm not going to get down until somebody else speaks, so that's a legit threat. Anyone? Anyone? Yeah? You already went, dude. Come on, give somebody else a chance, Ian. I'm going to go back to him, though. He's a sharp guy. Nobody else read the book, please, please. Okay, Ian, go ahead, take it.
There was a part of the book where it's also a little bit ahead, but one of the characters happened to die while waiting for a call from his son. And I thought that was an interesting part of the book where how the author in his very last moments of his life, he was kind of expecting a call from someone that he loved. But before he died, he didn't know that call.
Yeah, that's sad. That's the father, right? The father of the main character again. There's a lot about those relationships. And I think that one of the last thing I'll say about the book, and then Dr. Pauly I'd love him to join us. I don't think this is only a book about the Asian or Asian American experience, right? To me, one of the things that is so striking, especially about this book, and especially about the conversation we're having right now, is this idea of otherization, right? The other. We're always able to point at the other, right? And to be quite honest, the system, as we know it, as it has been built through hundreds of years, not a decade, not a generation, hundreds of years have programmed the system as we know it, right? And so to be able to use a work of art to call out the otherization of folks and whole populations within our communities, within our society, to me is powerful, right? So ask yourself those questions, right? Who is American? What qualifies as American? Right? And the last thing I'm going to say, which is, again, this is why the book kind of blows me away, there's a whole interaction between the black character, plays a police officer in the show, and the main character, Willis, right? And it's kind of blended. You're not sure if it's part of the script, it's part of their actual interaction as people, as human beings, actors playing roles. And the character says, the system is set up in a certain way, I'm paraphrasing, the system's set up in a certain way, but when you succeed within the system, you're not actually beating the system. You're strengthening the system. Right? So if you're an Asian in this caste system, literally caste, C-A-S-T, cast of a show, C-A-S-T-E, cast your role, your segment of society. When you work through that system and you quote unquote win, are you not just edifying the system itself? I mean, that blows my mind. Right? It blows my mind when I'm thinking we try to think we're working to do certain things, but if we're doing those things, are we, is it just a mind trick? I don't know. So anyway, I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to let him talk a little bit, and then I'm going to talk more. But anyway, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
This is a real treat to get to sit down and talk with an author about his work. I've always wanted to do this, but I study 18th century literature, so all the authors whose works I study are inconveniently dead.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to talk to the dead.
We've just never been able to get the scheduling to work out. I can't even get their agent on the phone.
Yep.
It's really
Yep.
wow, I'm echoing very strangely. I had lots of notes about your book, but what you've just said about Interior Chinatown makes me want to throw most of them out the window.
Let's just make it up, man. Every day. This is why I like being an administrator, because I make things up for a living as a novelist, and so, let's just make it up and see what happens.
Okay, so one thing.
This is what English professors do. We live on the wild side. I don't know if you guys know that. We're very dangerous people.
It's very edgy.
Yeah.
Very
cool.
So one thing that I was wondering about as I was reading your book after having read Interior Chinatown is Tony's family moved from Shanghai to New York before he was born. Mm-hmm. And then when he's 5, they move from Chinatown to the Bronx because business opportunities are going to be better there. Mm-hmm. And so Tony's in a very different position from Hughes Willis because he's, for most of his life, he's grown up in a neighborhood where people don't look like him. He sort of stands out as an artistic Asian kid, right. One of the few in his school. And that's a source of real tension between him and his parents for much of Deep in the Mountains. Mm-hmm. And actually, I guess I should provide just a very brief synopsis of the book.
Sure.
I actually feel strange offering a synopsis of his book when he's right here, but you'll let me know.
You'll
if
do
I
a
get
better
it right.
job.
Okay. So in this book, it centers on Tony, a teenage Chinese-American kid living in the Bronx, working in his parents' restaurant, going to school. Great student, but he kind of sticks out in his neighborhood. He's a bit overweight, he's artistic, and he's Chinese in a school where he's one of only a very, very few Asian kids. So he becomes the target of bullying from students and also sort of shamefully from teachers. But Tony, living in New York, has become completely enamored with the tradition of graffiti art. He just loves it. It feels, the city comes alive through graffiti, which has been sort of tamped down through policing. So in his frustration and, to get revenge on the people who've been bullying him, Tony pulls off a really virtuosic act of graffiti, completely covers one of his teacher's cars, and also leaves a humiliating caricature of the primary bully in the school. And it's all unfortunately caught on tape. So he's suspended for the rest of the school year. His parents are horrified, and they decide that, to help him sort of get himself together, they're going to send him to Shanghai for the summer and work with his uncle. But while he's in Shanghai, he actually gets to meet a sort of very revered artist, Master Zhu, and begins studying Chinese painting, classical Chinese painting, and he sort of incorporates this, what had been to him, alien artistic tradition, and it ultimately strengthens his own work as an artist. So at the end of the book, he's able to go back to New York with new perspective on art, on himself, and also on his relationship with his parents. Does that seem about right?
That was really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I told you you'd be better than me.
I do this stuff for a living.
Yeah.
So early on in the book, what struck me as really interesting is early on in the book, Tony's relationship to his own Chineseness is a problem, right? He doesn't feel comfortable as an American teenager. He feels like his family is not allowing him to be an American teenager. And then this really interesting arc of the book is that it's precisely by going to China, you'd think the last place on earth he would want to go, where he becomes most himself. And I guess I'm just, academics here will recognize this genre as though this is more a comment than a question move. But so I guess I'm just sort of wondering how you were thinking about Tony's sort of development over the course of this book as he comes to feel more at home with himself as he's introduced to Chinese history and culture in ways that he hadn't been before.
So thank you for the really good summary and for a really good question. So I'm going to meander a little bit, and I'm going to start with this, which is the book is not autobiographical, but there are certainly parts of the book that are influenced by my own experience, right? I definitely struggled with weight when I was young, right? I definitely felt like the quote-unquote only Chinese kid in the school because I was the only Chinese kid in the school, right? And the teasing and so on and so forth. And then, of course, not wanting to stick out, right? Because when you're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 37, 58, whatever it is, who really likes to stick out, right? In a way that feels like, who's that? Or what's that? Right? Nobody likes to feel that way. So, of course, I can certainly relate to that, right? And another personal element, as you mentioned, is this not having a connection with your culture, your heritage. And so I'll tell you, my family originally came from China, and they left China in 1949 when Mao Zedong came to power and went to Taiwan as refugees, okay? My grandmother, who was a badass, by the way, she was a senator in the Taiwanese government, So, I mean, I have like a history, right? My family history is like part of like Chinese history. But when you're a 14, 15-year-old kid growing up in Long Island, New York, you don't give a damn about history. You just want to survive every day, right? And I'm sure a lot of you can, connect to that. Like, you don't need to feel like you're the extra, you're the other, you got, stuff going on that people are going to kind of single you out for. Nobody wants that at that age. So I think there's a confluence of factors here, right? It's the tension of growing up. It's just like being a young person trying to figure things out, but then also navigating this very kind of unenviable landscape and an unfriendly landscape of there are hostile factors, hostile even when they don't intend to be hostile. And then you're just trying to survive and you're trying to figure it out. And you're dealing with your cultural heritage. You're dealing with your ethnic heritage, you're dealing with your immediate environment, your landscape of just who am I going to bump into any given day? What's going to happen, right? What's going to come at me from an angle that I don't even see or I don't understand? On top of all that pressure that comes from a place that is literally generations old, right? So the pressure that I think any of us or any character might feel, whether it's Willis in Interior Chinatown or Tony in my book or myself growing up, there are things that we are asked to kind of be a part of or to do or to deal with that have nothing to do with us as individuals, right? The American sensibility of meritocracy and individual gumption and so on and so forth. Not for nothing, folks of color and immigrants and people who come from those types of backgrounds, they don't necessarily have some of that luxury sometimes. And I think that's kind of where I see Tony's experience germinates from. And then, of course, I like to think that his journey as an artist helps him to evolve as a person as well, right? So, but yeah, there's a lot to that.
I think it's interesting too because Tony's really sort of caught, between two positions for much of the book. Because when he gets to Shanghai, he observes that for the first time in a long time, everybody looks like him.
Right.
And yet he still stands out. He's
Right.
instantly recognizable
Right.
as my American nephew, Tony from America.
Right.
His father even warns him about pickpockets before he goes because they'll know right away
Yep.
you're from America. And I was just wondering about that, this relationship to his heritage.
Mm-hmm.
He's sort of not American enough in America for some people's taste, but then when he gets to China, he's too American to be Chinese. And I'm just wondering about that, the sort of transition that he undergoes in the book.
And I don't think that's a uniquely Chinese or Asian experience. I think that, you know, anyone who comes from a different country and comes to the United States and establishes, you know, a life here, but then you go back, you know, you change, right? You literally will change. You know, sometimes it's physical, right? What you wear, what product you put in your hair, you know, something to that effect, or even just how you carry yourself. I'll tell you a funny story. I was giving blood, and you know, so you're sitting there, and they're sticking stuff in you, and you're giving blood, and I'm talking to these nurses, and I'm sitting. So I'm in one chair, my wife's in another chair, and these two Chinese nurses at Sloan Kettering, and they start talking to us, and so the one nurse is fascinated that I'm married to a white woman, which I think is just hilarious, right? But after 17 years, I'm just kind of used to it, right? So she's like grilling us. She's asking us all these questions. So she's asking me questions about like where I'm from and that kind of thing. But then the other one, the chattier one, was basically saying to my wife over and over again, "He doesn't look Chinese. He doesn't look Chinese." You know, I mean, he does, but he doesn't. He doesn't look Chinese. He doesn't act Chinese. He doesn't sound Chinese, right? And so, you know, she's kind of adorable on the one hand, and she's kind of really offensive on the other hand. I wasn't sure which one to kind of go with at any given point. It went back and forth. But, you know, I think that's part of it, right? Like you just, so again, there's this kind of sense of, like you said, not fitting in necessarily. And I don't know, I think it's a fascinating question, but it's also a difficult question. I don't know if there's an answer to it. But I think it's a very real experience, right? For any of you who have, you know, family from different, you know, even from different parts of the country. Maybe you're not even leaving the country, right? Like maybe you're from a different part of the country and they just do things a certain way and you left and you go back to it and again, you feel like the other. And there's always a middle ground to navigate. But I think that's very real, especially for immigrants.
I mean, Deep in the Mountains focuses on Tony, but maybe because I've got a son who's about Tony's age, I found myself really intrigued by, you know, the portrayal of his parents, which happens kind of on the margins in some ways. And I was really struck by this conversation, or let's call it a fight, between Tony and his parents when they're, you know, when the punishment for his graffiti comes down.
Yeah.
His mother seems to be completely shocked that her son has grown up to be so different from what she expected. And there was something you said in your remarks that, you know, if you're, say, an immigrant teen, your parents don't know what they don't know about living in America. His parents always tell him, apparently, you know, we did this for you, we came here for you. Interestingly, they came to America before he was born, so that struck me as sort of an interesting moment. But I was also wondering about how you were thinking about the parents' position in this, especially this moment where they decide that the best thing for Tony and for their family is to send him somewhere else, right? But I'm just thinking about the parents' experience of realizing that I may be Chinese, but my kid is American.
Right.
I'm from the South, and my kids are Yankees, and it's very, very disorienting for me. So,
well, so several years ago, this was when my first child was born. Someone said to me, "You think your kid's life is yours, but it's not. It's hers. She's already on a path that you have almost no control over, right? You're going to give her shelter, you're going to give her food, you're going to give her a good home, you're going to give her all the things that you can give her. But she's already her own person." And I was like, that's the worst thing anyone has ever said to me. Why did you say that? That's horrible. But it's true, right? Your kid, and you don't, I mean, this is an old person thing to say, right? But you don't realize that until you're older and you have a kid and you're like, oh, I have no control over what my kid thinks or feels or how they're going to function or any of those things. Like, you have no control over it, right? But I think especially with my parents, well, first of all, how many of us have grown up with parental or generational guilt, right? I got it in spades, man, you know? And I don't think that's an Asian thing. I think that's just like a generational thing, right? Like your parents are like, you know what I've done to give you this? You know, and I do it to my kids all the time. I do it to them all the time. How much do you want for this softball bat? You know how many times my mom spent $400 on a softball bat? Never. Ever. Right? Because that's just, you know, I'm a jerk. I don't know. I mean, but I think this is but at Tony's time, especially with that type of family where you come over, you're very targeted. Right, you come over and it's like a mission. It's the same thing in Interior Chinatown where the characters are on a mission, right? To the point that even when the choice is between the family and the people that I love versus getting the role that I have worked for decades to get to, I'm going to choose the role, right? Because at a certain point, I and my work stop separating. They are synonymous, right? And I think, unfortunately, Tony's family, you know, elements of my own upbringing, I think a lot of us have experienced this, right? You feel that. You feel that generational pressure. You feel that generational, historical kind of heft or burden of expectation, right? We came here for you, and it's true, but then it's also incredibly unfair, right? It's unfair for us to think, because I went through this is not a math problem, for God's sakes, right? If A equals B, then it must be C or something to that effect. I'm an English professor, I don't do math. But my point is, there is no real calculus to this. It is part of this kind of quixotic journey. And I think that is lost on those who are making the sacrifice. And ultimately, it is not part of the lens of those who are the beneficiaries of that sacrifice. Right? So I know now, like, my kids will never understand, you know, what I go through to do what I do and what my wife goes through to do what she does to provide for them, right? But eventually they will, I hope, if I do a decent job as a parent. But I think that's what happens in the book, and that's what happens in real life.
I'm just keeping an eye on time. We want to make sure we've got time for questions, but there was one thing I really wanted to ask you about. Over the course of Tony's time in Shanghai, he sort of re-engages with art. Mm-hmm. I mean, he'd gotten in trouble for spray painting, but he sort of takes on these lessons from Master Zhu, a classical Chinese painter, and he develops a new style that's really his own, and it comes from, he realizes, I'm not a graffiti artist. That was art, but that's not me. Mm-hmm. He finds something that can become his own. Mm-hmm. The thing I wanted to ask you about, there's a really, to me, intriguing moment where Master Zhu has had a seal made for Tony, so that he can stamp his paintings in the traditional red ink. And it sort of picks up on this moment. Tony had spent all this time developing his tag, Terra 180, when he wanted to be a graffiti artist. And then at the end, he's given this new tag, this thing he can make his mark with. And Master Zhu says, it's your Chinese name. But we never find out in the book what his Chinese name is. And so I was just very struck by what's going on with this, this very revered, very elderly painter giving as a gift to this young Chinese American artist. Here's how you make your mark. And this is your name, in a sense. But Tony gets to go on being Tony. So I guess I'm wondering about the act of the signature. And as an author, you've signed your. What do you think the power of sort of placing your name on a thing you've created is for the person who makes it?
I love talking to literary scholars about my stuff because they talk about it so much better than I would. Because I'd be like, well, this happened and that happened and then the end, and please go buy a book. I don't know, right? But hearing it actually broken down that way is pretty cool. I think for me, art and through writing was always about trying to find my place, right? I knew I was not going to be an athlete. I knew I wasn't going to be a singer. I knew I wasn't going to be an actor. I knew I wasn't a lot of things. I'll just leave it at that, right? But I knew I was good at writing. And I'll just tell you a quick story. I went into college as a business major, and I fought for my life in microeconomics in my first semester as a freshman, I was like, I am getting the hell out of here. I'm going to English and I'm never looking back, right? And that's what happened, right? I just knew what I wasn't, and I knew it early on what I was not. So writing for me was always a way for me to define myself, right? To try to find my way and to grow and to carve a path. And again, to be unique and to just try to say like, you know, I'm good at this, right? I feel good about it. When I do this, I feel good about it. And I can make some kind of mark. I can stamp some kind of space for myself. And I think for me, you know, writing this character Tony and understanding the journey of Master Chu's life, you know, art to me is something that is a vessel for exploration, for discovery, for interrogation, and ultimately to get better, to get sharper, to grow. Right? We talk about books in the present tense. If your composition teachers are doing the right job, they are yelling at you. Every time you write about, you know, the grapes of wrath, and Steinbeck, you know, said, past tense, no, big red Sharpie X through that, right? Says, because the book is a work of art, it is a living, breathing work of art. You don't talk about a painting in the past tense because it is a work of art. Someone is always interacting with it. Somewhere, somehow, that is why it is a living, breathing work, right? And so for me, that kind of journey of exploration and that the movement of art is so exciting, right? And it's powerful, and it can really change things. So going back to your question, right, how does that kind of define the character? How does that define the journey? There has to be a symmetry when you're writing a novel, right? This is a very traditional novel. You know, I hate to use this word, but it's kind of melodramatic. Like, you just have the feeling all the way through, Tony's going to be okay, right? Aliens are not going to come out of the sky and vaporize him or anything like that. He's never in mortal danger. But there's got to be some drama in the arc of a story, and that's fine. Right? But it's really about the emotional kind of journey, right? It's about the psychological journey of trying to find yourself and test yourself. And I think art is that challenge. Any of you who have done anything that requires, like I said before, the pressure of having no pressure, doing something just because you want to do it, it's different, right? It's different when you just say, I burn because I want to do this. That's a different kind of pressure, you know. And so I think this is where, and I've said this before, whether I'm writing a short story and it's 20 pages, or when I was trying to write novels and, you know, they're hundreds of pages, the pain you go through is the same. The wrestling you go through with a character, the fighting you go through on a sentence, right? Reading your dialogue back, does this sound right? Does this sound real? Like, all the wrestling of craft, that is painful, right? But I think that is part of what helps you grow and what helps you evolve and what helps you test yourself. Because if you think you're going to go down there and paint the painting in one shot and it's going to be great, you're wrong. If you think you're going to write a great story in 1 or 2 drafts, you're wrong. You think every photograph you take on your iPhone is an Ansel Adams, you're wrong, right? There's craft. This is craft. This is about exercise and ultimately sharpening and crystallizing to the point that you're true to yourself. And that is, again, there's no metric. There's no right or wrong to that. You just know when it's done. As it says at one point in the book, you just know when it's done because there's nothing left to do. And then you have to move on to the next one because it's waiting for you.
And similarly, I think we have to move on to our question and answer.
Everyone,
period. Yeah,
I mean, we have, you know, this is what happens when your book goes out of print. You have hundreds of copies of your book. So I sent some over here. I hope people have a chance to get a copy. Don't try to sell it online because it's not worth anything. But, you know, I'm happy to sign it for you and have it on your shelf.
Yeah, can we, any questions from the audience today? Yes, please. It looks like we have a microphone over here. Maybe, could you come to the microphone? And
oh, wow. It's so organized. I love this room, by the way.
Oh, it is. It's gorgeous.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But I'm glad we have a microphone because, as I told my students, I had a lot of fun in my 20s, but my hearing is not what it should be anymore.
Yes, thank you, Professor Chen, for joining us today. My question is, you chose this artist to juxtapose against your character here. Why this particular historical figure? What is it about the artist that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Zhu Qizhan is he's considered one of the quote unquote contemporary masters of Chinese art, and there are several, right? And I'll just tell you a quick story. I got married. Wedding announcement came out in the New York Times, and I got a call from an editor that said, "Hey, you want to write a book?" I was like, "Hell yeah." That was it. That's how I got the contract for this second book, right? So, as with most things, I owe it all to my wife. So, I had to pick an artist. The book series was about fiction based on the life of an artist, right? So they'd done Frida Kahlo and others. And so I had to pick the artist, and so I researched artists, and Master Chu's life spoke to me because my first novel, Sons of Heaven, is set during the Tiananmen Square massacre, and so I'd studied a lot about Chinese history, and so I knew a lot about Chinese history, especially in the 20th century, and his life literally covers from the late 1890s all the way through the late 1990s. He lived for 100 years. He lived through the most tumultuous periods of contemporary Chinese history in his life. And that to me was amazing. And the fact that he was also persecuted during the Cultural Revolution and still kept painting after that, when so many people's lives were just stamped, and really just trampled. So that was really inspiring to me. And I just thought, and I looked at the stuff, I'm not an artist, right? I looked at the stuff, I was like, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's, and in that classical way, but the use of color and some of the brushwork, it was very moving. So it just felt like a good connection. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Another question?
I see someone back there flinching.
Please, yep, come on, Kara, please. Whoa, professor voice.
Whoa,
very
yeah,
good.
we got lecture hall voice going. All right, go.
So I'm Kara Flint. I'm a sociology professor. Thank you for being here today. When the COVID-19 pandemic started, you might be aware that our students on campus, particularly the Asian Cultural Society that my colleague Dr. Lee is the faculty advisor for, were really concerned about the political rhetoric, anti-Asian rhetoric, and they did a Stop Asian campaign. They raised awareness and fun. And I just wanted to share that with you because our students are really invested in social justice. And I wonder, as an author, as a writer, as an artist, if you have thoughts. My students are taking an anti-racism and social justice class and I'm teaching. If you have thoughts about how art can lead to social justice, and if you have advice for students around that.
Yeah, I don't know how. Look, I think social justice, fighting racism, fighting systemic racism, fighting anything that we frankly feel is broken in our society, and having our rationalized, structured approach, but also utilizing our passion is key. So I don't know how art might fit in. I'm sure it does, but what I'll say is that COVID really kind of tore it all open, right? And so now we can say the quiet parts out loud, like go back to China, go back to your country, et cetera, right? We know it's out there, like beating up old Chinese ladies or old Asian ladies in New York City, like that kind of stuff, just out of nowhere, right? Why? Because it's easy. It's easy to target. Right? And Asians also inhabit a middle ground that is not necessarily part of the overarching conversation about race. And I say this about myself all the time, right? Again, like I said before, I was a model minority for a long time, right? It wasn't until George Floyd's death and Black Lives Matter, and it's like, you know what? You haven't done jack in your life to help any of this. If anything, by being a model minority, you perpetuate it. You are a part of the system. You're doing what you are told and expected to do in your box. And frankly, if you're serious, then that is unacceptable, right? So that's a challenging question for myself, right? And that is something I pose to myself every day in the work that I try to do as both a father, as a professor, an administrator, just as, you know, a neighbor, right? Somebody in the society, in the community. So what can we do for that? I think is recognizing, part of it is, for me, is recognizing what I haven't done, right? And sure, I've experienced racism, but I can't say I'm just a victim, right? I've perpetuated it in my own ways. I've certainly behaved in racist ways throughout my life, and I have to own that. I've certainly perpetuated the system in my own life by not doing or saying certain things at certain times, right? And so now I have making up to do, right? I have a responsibility in this leadership role, but also just as a person of color, and somebody who has a voice and has to feel strong enough to use it. But I think, you know, we're in a weird time, man. It's not comfortable, and it's not going to be easy, and we're going to have to make some pretty hard decisions. For me, sitting back is not one of them, and so any chance I get to kind of do something or talk about something or exercise something in my official kind of professional capacity that I think is going to move the needle and get us off center, right? Then I think we should do that. If we do it through art, that's great. Right? If we do it through our voice, through our activism, through our community efforts, through volunteering, whatever it might be, that's great. But this is an all-in situation where, you know, either we're in for the fight or we're not, right? And I just don't think, I think sitting on the sidelines for this one it's just not an option.
Our time has just flown by this
there
morning.
was one gentleman
do we have
sitting
time
right
for,
there.
okay.
Yeah.
Dixon, please.
I'll try to protect myself. Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed your book. And for me, I finished it last night. The takeaway point, beyond superseding some of the cultural issues that you talked about, cultural isolations, companionship versus loneliness. Tony is lonely and he sees his workaholic uncle alone. And also the message of the start of the film, the even temperament master shoe, very good, it's impetuous, hot-headed uncle. And then towards the end of the book, he has this evolution of thought when he realizes this comes from loneliness versus his parents who fall asleep every night exhausted. They have a temperament. They have long-lasting, permanent relationship for years. And I'm wondering if this was a conscious message to young readers in terms of respecting the wisdom and coolness of mature thought of the elderly and the value of long-lasting companionship.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably a lot smarter than I am, so I'll try my best to cobble something together. I'll end with where I think we started, right, which is that we get into higher education because we believe in people, right? This is a people business, faculty, staff, administration, and students too, right? Like you come here because you believe in yourselves as individuals, as people, and then you also believe that your work is going to impact other people, right? And so, you know, again, if we look at themes within a book, right? If we look at the themes not just as challenges, but as maybe you know, messages to think about, right? Just to say like, well, how are we going to be better? How are we going to be stronger? How do we improve as individuals? But then also, how do we as individuals improve each other, right? And so Tony's journey, he starts out by meeting Master Chu, and he's a little, right? He's from America. He comes in. He's got this really bad attitude, et cetera, et cetera. He steals paintbrushes from Master Chu. And the uncle drags him back and makes him apologize and says, you know, your butt is going to actually work with Master Chu now, right? Because you got to earn your respect back. You got to earn your face back. In Chinese, it's called 丢脸, which means you've thrown away your face, right? You've lost your respect, right? So he's got to earn that back, right? So how do you, but then through that journey, learning from somebody who's more experienced, who's older, learning from somebody who's gone through some stuff, right? Listen, I got a big mouth and I use it a lot, right? I think a lot of myself on a lot of days, but I also try to be humble and know that there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I haven't experienced. And we gotta rely on each other, and we gotta work together, and we gotta respect each other. And as much as I have some strong opinions and attitudes, I try to just be cool with people as much as I can, right? Until you cross that line, right? Then we know certain things may have to happen. But generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, you got to know what you don't know. You got to work with each other. You got to work together, right? And that, whether that's, again, President Nunez and I, we talk about it all the time, right? How do we work with our collective bargaining units? How do we work with faculty? How do we work through shared governance, right? You got to figure out how to work together. Student groups, how do you share different perspectives? In a classroom, how do you share different ideas? Because that friction is good, right? Friction is good. Friction creates heat, it creates energy. Bumping into each other, stuff happens, right? Think about what COVID took away from us for a second. Sitting in your room, sitting in your house, staring at the same people, staring at the same stuff, doing the same thing every single day. We lost something amongst each other. I'll tell you, as a professional, I lost the ability to walk down the hall, walk around my campus, run into people, see what's up, see how people are doing, get ideas. See problems for myself and then try to fix them. What's going on with this? What's going on with that? What do you mean so-and-so said something or other? There's a problem there. That interaction, that friction was so good, and I didn't know how good it was until I didn't have it anymore. And I think the friction of ideas is so powerful. Right, and so I think this is something that if there's a theme in the book that, along those lines that we can, just try to utilize, and I'm not the only one that says it. I mean, obviously, this is a big part of art and just society, but use each other. Even when you don't like each other sometimes, right? You can still use each other, make each other better, help each other, right? There's more good than there is evil, right? That's why we keep perpetuating as a society. Right? That's why we keep moving forward, as painful as it is sometimes. But I do think there's so much to learn from each other, and just, try to be humble, try to be cool, and just know that that's the only way we're going to make it. Because if we just keep fighting with each other all the time, right? MSNBC versus Fox, Republicans versus Democrats, this versus that. All the versus is just destructive in its negativity, right? And doesn't mean we don't fight with each other once in a while, but again, let's use that interaction, that friction to create something positive together. So, thank you for the question.
Thank you.